Welcome to the Analyst View by Capital Group, a podcast series that offers concise, investment-centric dialogues. In each episode, they'll deep dive with Capital Group's analysts to bring you focused discussions on sectors and themes shaping the investment landscape. Straight to the point conversations designed to provide you with the knowledge you need. In this episode, asset class lead for equities, Katharine Dryer, speaks to equity investment analyst Melissa Gallagher about why pharmaceuticals remains an attractive investment area for stock pickers and how obesity treatment and AI continue to drive innovation in this space.
Thank you for joining me today for the next in our series of the Analyst View podcasts. My name's Katharine Dryer. I'm asset class lead for equities and multi-asset. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Melissa Gallagher, who's been covering the pharma and biotech sectors for over 20 years and has been with us here at Capital Group for 3 years. Melissa, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you, Katharine.
Before we delve into current opportunities in the sector, I'd like to just take a moment just to generally scene set. You've covered the industry for many years. Can I ask you what makes it attractive from an investment standpoint?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for that question, Katharine. It's a sector that's sort of out of favour right now, but there's a lot of positive attributes to it. So to me, I think it's an attractive sector to invest in because for those companies that can successfully innovate to bring a valuable medicine to the market, the growth and returns for that company can be above the market average, and that creates an investment opportunity for us. So if we think about the pharma sector in general, there's still significant unmet medical need, and the demographics of an aging population and increasing access to medicine in developing markets are positive tailwinds for the industry. And then additionally, if we think about scientific discovery and new technologies, these are all enabling companies to tackle new drug targets that were previously inaccessible to them. So there's still plenty of opportunity for the pharma industry as a whole. And then some of the controversy in the sector right now is around pricing, but I still fundamentally believe that society will pay for innovation that brings clinical value to patients. And whilst those medicines and drugs that come forward are patent protected, the prices will remain attractive. Therefore, the gross margins on those products remain high, which means the returns and the cash flow generation for the companies will also be high. And that's what makes the industry attractive for investors. But you have to be very careful about making sure you pick the right stocks.
Thanks, Melissa. So just digging in a little bit deeper there, if we think about the sector, it is one that's characterised by a rapid pace of innovation and also intense levels of competition. So maybe I can get you to talk a little bit more around how you go about identifying those companies that you believe can generate the high returns and cash flows that you talked about. And really, what are the key attributes that you look for?
Yeah, sure. So farmers sort of generate that period of outsized returns during the patent-protected period for their key products. So being able to spot those key products early is critical. And that's where the skill of a fundamental pharma analyst comes in. So first of all, you need to be able to identify which of the products they're working on has that potential to be a big and transformational product. And then secondly, we have to appraise all the clinical data that's being produced in order to be able to judge pretty early on whether it's likely to be a successful product or not, and therefore change the outlook for the company and valuation for the company. So for me, for biopharma, innovation is the key to long-term value creation, but the companies need to be able to execute and deliver. And so there are some specific things that I look out for in a company when I'm looking to make an investment. So firstly, as I've mentioned, I look for what I call a transformational asset. So that's a product that's going to be big enough to change the outlook for the company. But then I'm also looking for a stable base business from that product to grow from. If a company can have a great new product in the pipeline, but if their base business is declining, for example, due to patent expiries, they tend to be running to stand still and they just never deliver the growth. And then in pharma, R&D is critical. So I really look for companies that have a strong R&D track record. And because pharma patents expire, pharma companies have to keep innovating to make sure that they can continually refresh their portfolios. And those companies that have a strong track record in R&D tend to command a higher valuation because the market believes that they will continue to refresh their portfolio.
What I'd love to do now is really focus a bit more on the opportunities that you see in the biopharma sector today, and specifically to think about two areas. Firstly, developments to tackle obesity, and secondly, the impact of AI on productivity within the sector. So maybe if we could start with the first of those. And can I get you to talk a little bit around how some of the changes in diet that we've witnessed over the last 50 years or so have had an impact on the healthcare sector?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, obviously, obesity is a very hot topic right now. And I think, so the important thing to note here is that there's been a significant increase in calories, or possibly led by the increase in the density of food calories, which has led to a significant increase in obesity rates in the US and Europe over the last 50 years. Now, obviously, this hasn't been good for the health of the population, but it has been a big tailwind for the pharma sector and actually the healthcare industry overall. And that's because obesity isn't just a matter of cosmetics. Chronic obesity significantly increases a patient's risk of developing other chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes, like fatty liver disease, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and many other conditions. So if we think about that, the obesity epidemic obviously has been a significant driver of growth for the healthcare industry. And I think if we focus in on type 2 diabetes specifically, because that's the chronic disease that's most directly associated with obesity, we can see that the prevalence of type 2 diabetes has pretty much increased in lockstep with the increasing prevalence of obesity. And we've got to a point now, whereas in the US, around 15% of the adult population has type 2 diabetes. And that's been a threefold increase over the last 50 years, given the size of the overall budget. But it's also been very important for the broader healthcare industry. If you think about all the companies that make the blood glucose monitoring systems, the insulin pumps and devices, and even the dialysis companies, because kidney disease is a common complication of type 2 diabetes. So then, if we add to that the other obesity-related conditions like cardiovascular disease and cancer, we can see how obesity has been a big tailwind for the healthcare industry overall.
Thank you. And these trends have obviously been accompanied by rapid developments within the healthcare industry itself. And GLP-1s have really taken center stage as a way to address the obesity epidemic. Before we dig into that, can I just ask you, in a nutshell, what are GLP-1s and how do they work?
Okay, in a nutshell. Okay, GLP-1s, or glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor agonists, they're a class of medicines that mimic the action of the natural hormone called GLP-1. And GLP-1 is produced in the gut in response to eating, and its role is to regulate blood sugar and also control appetite. So GLP-1 drugs regulate blood sugar by stimulating insulin secretion and suppressing glucagon production. And they reduce calorie intake by firstly slowing gastric emptying, so you feel fuller for longer. But they also work in the brain directly to signal fullness, which reduces appetite. So that means we've seen them sort of be applied, and they've been approved for the treatment of type 2 diabetes because of the blood sugar control, but because they can also control appetite and reduce the calorie intake, they've now been approved for obesity. And obviously that's where they're gaining a lot of attention.
Very clear. Thank you. So just looking forward in terms of GLP-1s, how widespread do we think the adoption of those drugs could become on, say, a 10-year time frame? And can we learn actually from precedents from other drugs and take up?
Yeah, I mean, there's clearly a lot of hype around this category, which, would lead us to believe that they could be very widespread in their use. But I think there are a number of things that need to happen before we can get to sort of peak levels of adoption and penetration into the target market. So if we look at other primary care drugs, like the drugs for high cholesterol or high blood pressure, that also have hard outcomes, and by that I mean we have that clinical data to show that use of those drugs genuinely prevents cardiovascular events like strokes and heart attacks, we can see that those drugs eventually get to around a 65 to 70% penetration into their target market. But it takes a few things to get there. So first of all, we need clear treatment guidelines. Mm-hmm. We need price to come down. And it typically takes around 20 years. Now, obviously, we're just at the beginning of the GLP-1 obesity journey. But if we look at where we are now, if we were to assume a 70% penetration into the US and European target population at current GL1P prices, that would imply $1 trillion market for GLP-1s. So clearly price has to come down. There's no way society could afford that. And I think that's probably going to come down in a few ways. So initially, I think as we get more GLP-1 drugs coming to the market, there'll be different value propositions. So by that, I mean we can expect some of the more efficacious drugs that give more weight loss. Those will be targeted at the patients that have the highest body mass index and can have significant health complications, and those will keep a higher price. And then we can think about drugs that probably have a little bit less efficacy, which are more suited to those patients that are overweight with fewer health complications. So we'll start to see, a range of price points within the patented GLP-1. But I think what will really drive the price down will be when the first patents expire, and that will be in 2032. And if we look at how pricing changes when generics come to the market. So, for example, today a GLP-1 in the US at the insured price is around $25 a day. If we compare that to a patented oral diabetes medicine, that's around $10 a day. Mm-hmm. But then if we look at a generic blood pressure medicine, that's less than $1 a day. So you can see how much price can come down. This is still a very novel field, and we actually need clear guidelines on how to really treat obesity. We haven't had safe and efficacious obesity drugs for very long. So doctors are still really figuring out the best way to approach this issue for patients. And interestingly, for this category, supply really needs to ramp up. If we look globally, it's estimated that over 1 billion people suffer from being either overweight or obese. So that's a huge population to potentially treat. And over the next few years, it's expected that we could get to the point where we can treat hundreds of millions of patients as opposed to the few million that we're treating today. And then I think one thing that's quite specific to obesity is how long will patients stay on these drugs? Will they cycle through? Will they lose the weight and then come off and then have to go back on again? And I think that's important to think about, because if on average a patient is sort of only on a drug 50% of the time, that will have an impact on that peak level of penetration.
Turning now to the second area of opportunity, let's talk a bit about the potentially transformative impact of AI. And maybe I could get you to talk about how meaningful that is for the biopharma industry, and maybe to give us some examples of ways in which technology has really enhanced productivity.
Yeah, I think actually AI is a huge opportunity for the biopharma industry, and probably one that's underappreciated right now. And I think what's most underappreciated is the potential to sort of boost the innovation within the industry. And I'm not talking about AI being able to discover and develop a medicine from scratch. We're a very, very long way from being able to do that. But AI can be a great tool to really improve R&D productivity, which is critical in the industry. So despite spending hundreds of billions each year on drug development across the industry, R&D productivity still remains very low. Only 1 in 10 drugs that enter phase 1 make it all the way through development to become a commercial product. If we could make that 2 drugs in 10, that's a huge gain. Yeah. So I think there are 3 ways that AI can really be applied to increase R&D specifically. So number 1 is improving the success rate of drug development. Number 2 is speeding up drug development. And then number 3 is it actually improving how these products are marketed to increase their commercial success, which would help returns on R&D. So if we think about pharma as an industry, it has huge amounts of data that it's collected over the years from clinical trials and from experiments. And then if we think, in addition to that, there's a vast amount of data out there that's publicly available from scientific publications and patent applications. And so AI tools can be used to interrogate all of that data, to really start to come up with things like new drug targets to go after, or ways of optimizing the design of the medicines, or coming up with new clinical endpoints to make trials more likely to be successful. And all of these things should boost the probability of success for drug development. So maybe we could get to the point where 2 in 10 drugs are successful. And actually, some of the companies are at the position now where they're actually starting to collate that data and get it into a usable format. I mean, that's the big challenge here. So it's really worth monitoring those companies that are already starting on that journey. In terms of speeding up drug development, so we think about it, drugs only really have that limited patent life. And it's right at the end of that patent life when the drugs are generating the highest sales and profits. And so if we could extend the marketed life of a drug by 6 to 12 months, that's worth billions in incremental cash flow for a pharma company. And actually, AI is already being used here. Most of the companies are already doing this. And what they're doing is they're using AI tools to really optimize clinical trial recruitment and conduct to make the trials just run quicker and sort of try and minimize the time between the different phases of development. And if all of that can help with commercial success, that's really important because it really improves the return on the R&D investment they've made into developing that drug. So yeah, I think there's lots of potential for AI in pharma. And as I said, I think it's one that people aren't as aware of. And so a lot of opportunity there.
So, I mean, we have talked a lot about opportunity, but as we alluded to upfront, the biopharma sector has not been without its challenges in recent times. We have seen a lot of change and a lot of uncertainty. So just in closing, if I were to ask you, as you look forward, is your tone primarily one of caution at the moment or one of optimism? How are you navigating the landscape ahead of you?
Yeah, I think this brings us back to where we started. And I still fundamentally believe that biopharma can be a great investment opportunity. I remain confident that we will pay for medical innovation that brings meaningful clinical value. And I think the pace of scientific discovery, the evolution of new technologies, that includes AI capabilities, means that there's just so much more potential for the industry. And I think that's the great advantage of being a long-term investor. The sector is under pressure right now, but we can use these periods of poor sentiment and depressed valuations to really invest in those companies that we believe have the potential to create significant value for shareholders through innovation over the long term.
Melissa, thank you. That's been incredibly clear and really sensing the opportunity over the long term coming through there.
Thank you.
The Analyst View is brought to you by Capital Group, one of the world's largest and most experienced active investment managers. If you like what you heard today, please follow us on your favourite podcast platform, as well as LinkedIn. Thank you for listening.
Biotech is short for biotechnology, focusing on the use of living organisms or biological systems in developing medical products or treatments. Gross margin refers to the percentage of revenue left over after a company subtracts its direct costs. Patent protection grants a pharmaceutical company the exclusive right to manufacture, use, and sell a newly developed medicine for a set period, typically 20 years from the filing date. Patent expiry refers to the end of a period when a patent is valid. After expiry, other companies can produce generic versions of the product. Generic refers to non-brand versions of drugs that are produced after the original patent expires, usually at a lower cost. R&D stands for research and development. Insured price is the cost of prescription drugs for individuals with health insurance coverage. Phase 1 refers to the first stage of testing a new drug or treatment in humans, focusing on safety and identifying potential side effects in a small group of people. Clinical endpoint refers to the predefined outcomes that are measured to assess the effectiveness of a treatment or intervention. GLP-1s are a class of drugs called glucagon-like peptide-1 receptor agonists. These mimic a natural hormone in the body to help regulate blood sugar and appetite, used especially for treating type 2 diabetes and obesity. Clinical data refers to information collected from medical research involving patients used to determine if a treatment is safe and effective. Primary care drugs are medicines prescribed for common health problems and managed by general practitioners, such as high blood pressure or high cholesterol. M&A stands for mergers and acquisitions, which means companies combining or one company buying another. Capital allocation is how a company invests its financial resources in projects, products, or other investments to maximize returns. This content is intended to highlight issues and be of a general nature. It should not be considered advice, an endorsement, or a recommendation. Products mentioned are not an offer of the product and may not be available for sale or purchase in all countries. All investments have risk and you may lose money. Past results are not a guarantee of future results. Statements attributed to an individual represent the opinions of that individual as of the date published and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Capital Group or its affiliates. This content is published by Capital Client Group, Inc. and copyrighted to Capital Group and Affiliates. 2025, all rights reserved. For more information, including our detailed disclosures, visit www.capitalgroup.com/global-disclosures.